So let me see, like, where the hell are we? We got some backgrounds, we got the general hack attack thing. Cool. So, yeah, I'm gonna drop this link in chat so that you guys can hop into the general hack attack document again in case you're curious and you wanted to see what was going on there. So last time
Our documents are spreading. We started with none, and then we have one and two, and
Yep.
pretty soon we'll have a whole folder full of
Yep,
things.
yep. I actually made a folder that I could share with Adam so that we could keep track of things in their separate, parts. Because like I was starting to work on backgrounds, it just didn't make sense to put it into the other document because it's its own separate large feature.
So do we want to do a quick review of what it is that we're doing here?
Yeah.
What are we trying to accomplish?
Yeah, well, you came to me a little while ago, a couple weeks ago, and you said, hey, it feels like Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition is fighting you a little bit on some things for the West Marches specifically. Do you want to sit down with me and, like, hack it some so that it works better? And I said, yeah, absolutely.
That's the correct answer.
Yep. So we sat down and we started, just talking about what issues there are with D&D 5th edition and sort of what we could do to fix it. So we ended up taking a look at, we didn't think a whole lot needed to be removed. Like, we talked about just straight up removing traits, ideals, bonds, and flaws. They're not that useful for us. We talked about editing the way you gain inspiration, and I'm actually going to talk a little bit about that here at the beginning of things today. We talked about adding, things to track downtime and track time in general better, add more granularity to exploration. We talked about needing to change the way you gain XP because, like, right now in 5th Ed, you just get it from killing monsters everywhere, but that's not the primary thing you do in the West Marches. It's a big part of the West Marches, but it's not the main focus of the show. So yeah, we just talked about a bunch of stuff, and last time we talked more about what needed to change on the inspiration side. We talked some about backgrounds and how they don't really work with the West Marches as I'm using it right now. We were going to talk about XP, but we spent so much time talking about inspiration that we didn't get to it. But that was great because we really put together, I thought, a very functional new variant rule for inspiration.
Yeah, so just as a sort of aside, this is very much a West Marches companion show, in the same way that the Swan Song GM turn is a sort of director's cut background stuff for that show. So if you are sensitive to spoilers, there may be some. In this episode, we'll try to avoid specific stuff, but we will talk about the show. So we'll try to keep the spoilers to a minimum.
Yeah, I'm going to try to avoid spoiling what happened in recent episodes of the West Marches. If we're talking 4 or 5 episodes back, I'm probably going to talk about that. I probably won't talk anything about what happened yesterday except for the inspiration rules that we used, but no content, just the way the rules played out at the table. If I get to a spoiler, I will say, here comes a spoiler, and then when the spoiler is over, I'll go like this. I'll be like, it's okay, come back.
Yeah, we'll let you know.
Yep.
Cool. So the whole sort of philosophical point of this stuff is to examine the game that we're playing, in this case 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, and to sort out ways in which it's helping or not helping us play the game that we want to play. Because what really, a lot of this came from an episode of Being Everything Else that we did about understanding what games do at the table. And the trouble that a lot of groups run into, and this exact problem happens constantly, where a game tries to be a thing that it's not, and you end up with frustration playing that game because the mechanisms just don't reward you for the right stuff, and the players don't play it the way you want, and everybody gets frustrated. And so what we're trying to do is, again, this is the thing, tabletop role-playing games are a technology that requires no tool really to disassemble and reassemble them, to hack, right? You can really just go in and say, I understand these rules because I play the game and I want to try and apply them in a different way or apply a different framework to the same rules. So that's kind of what we've been doing so far. We've started with the kind of the easiest stuff, and we're working our way towards what appears to be the hardest stuff. And I think that it's been really interesting for me, I think, and interesting for the audience too, to see the process, right? To see what it actually looks like in terms of sitting down and doing it, right? Because we talk, I think, a lot about modifying the rules or doing house rules or hacking a game, but watching the whole process go has been, I don't know, it's been really fun. I'm really enjoying it, and I think that it's people are appreciating the content in a way that maybe surprise me a little. It's very cool to see like fledgling game designers tune in and kind of see what we're doing.
Yeah, I'm having a total blast. What was I going to say? Yeah, it's actually kind of funny how the Hack Attack has shades of the West Marches in it. Like, it's obviously very focused on the West Marches because that's what we're trying to build towards. But it's also got shades of R&D because, like, this is the closest to the D of R&D that we've seen on the sort of roleplay area streams. And also, it ties in perfectly with being everything else because that strong understanding of the rules and how they're supposed to play and how they do play is a big part of that side of the table also. So it's like all of our awesome shows are coming together in a great conflagration of glory, Adam.
Yeah, exactly. I prefer to do everything in the conflagration form.
Yeah.
That's my preferred method, conflagrating.
Yeah, conflagrations for everyone.
Yeah. All right. So where do you want to start? Do you want to look at backgrounds again? Because that's where we were at the beginning of the last one.
I want to start because I think it's going to be the quickest thing. I want to start with a recap of Inspiration and what happened with that over the since we actually played with the Inspiration rule last time. Let me find the post that I wrote up about it on Reddit so I can tell you all what the exact rule was.
Yeah, while you were playing West Marches, I was slogging my way through Pillars of Eternity, so I actually didn't get to see much of what happened. So I'm actually really interested to see. This is a fun part, I think, about designing mechanics, is like seeing what it's like when it hits the table. And I mean, no game survives contact with players, so I'm curious to see the way that it turned out.
So let me see. And I also had a comment down here, Inspiration. So I'm just finding like my own thoughts that I posted from yesterday's Q&A. Yeah, there we go. I found them. Okay, so the Inspiration rule that I was using reads as such, and I posted the link to it in chat. I'll drop that in one more time. The Inspiration rule, the problem that I had with Inspiration is that currently, the way it's written in 5th ed, it requires too much tracking on my part because I have to know 2 traits, 1 ideal, 1 bond, and 1 flaw for every player at the table. That's potentially 20 things about characters times 5 for each additional character. It requires too much evaluation on my part. Like, I'm constantly sort of reading people to see, is this worth Inspiration or is it not? Who knows? And so, like, as a consequence, great role players like Zeke wouldn't get earned Inspiration because I just sort of see it so often that it falls to a white noise level in my brain and I don't reward it. Whereas someone who doesn't role play regularly but like pops it up every once in a while, I would say, aha, like easy to reward you with Inspiration. And then the third thing I didn't like about it is that because it requires too much evaluation, players don't have a clear understanding of when they'll be able to get it again. It's just kind of whenever I decide to give it to them. So they would tend to hoard it, right? So things that I want Inspiration to do. I want to reward players for role-playing. Like, just flat out, philosophically, that's something I want. And that's something that, like, a lot of feedback on that Q&A thread for the last Hack Attack episode, like, people aren't necessarily all on board with that. Many commenters don't want to reward players for role-playing. They feel it'll feel weird or it'll feel different. I understand that. I actually want to reward it. So, that's a thing. Second, I want it to be crystal clear how players gain Inspiration. I don't want them to have any question. If you do this, then you get that. Great.
Yeah.
Third, I also specifically want to see more single-character spotlight exposition stuff in-game, where, like, Grigori sacrifices a villager, or Kellen speaks with his father, or Sicarian has visions in the warp. I want to see more stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, the rule is, once during each long rest, any character may frame a scene that shows the audience more about them. This scene can involve other players or NPCs, or it can be a solo vignette. It can be a flashback, or something happening right now. The character who frames this scene gains Inspiration. At any point during the scene, any one other player, take note, player, may ask that character, take note, character, for more information about the scene. This player's character also gains Inspiration, and they must frame the next scene in this way. If multiple players have questions about the scene framer may decide who's to answer. A character may only frame a scene for themselves in this way once per session. So that was the rule that I proposed to the group yesterday. I got unanimous buy-in so that nobody would feel, like it was pushed on them or anything like that. They were all pretty keen on giving it a try. And To my mind, it worked in some interesting ways, and it broke down in some interesting ways too. So it needs more testing before I want to change it from its current format. I thought it worked well enough to be worth testing more,
Yeah, of
but
course.
but it was interesting. So
Well, this is the thing, right? Is that like, okay, we got to see the rubber hit the road once, so you can't, like, we can draw some conclusions, but this is a thing that's common in game design where you're like, I made up a thing and we tried it and one thing went wrong or something felt weird, and then you're like, well, shit, the whole rule, we should throw it out. I got to rebuild it, got to make a new thing.
nah.
Like, we do need to test, even if it goes poorly, you got to repeat it a few times and have it be like, okay, this was wrong for the same reasons every time, because you never know. There's too many variables
Mhm.
in a role playing game at the table. So
Yep.
so
So
this is just like initial analysis of it, looking at, okay, we've used it once. How is it different in real life versus on paper, and so forth and so on. So did you use this variant rule the whole way through the episode?
yes,
Okay,
yep,
cool.
used it the
Tell
whole way
us,
through the episode. So
how'd
um,
that go?
they didn't take a long rest until pretty late into the episode.
Yep.
So, like, there was a time when they got a short rest pretty early on, and during that short rest, one of the characters had sort of a thing that sort of felt like it fit this very well. But because I was following the rule, I didn't give him inspiration for it.
Yeah.
And then, like, we carried on, and there was sort of another, like, mid-action flashback that felt like it also could have fit very well within the rule, but it wasn't during any kind of rest, so I didn't reward inspiration. And then we
Sure.
got to the long rest, and I said, okay, it's long rest time. Does anybody want to, take advantage of the new inspiration rule and have a little scene about their character? And there was a little bit of silence at first. People were
Of
like,
course.
I don't know. I don't know if I want to, like, break the action with something, And then JP said, okay, yeah, I will. I'll go. And then he gave us a little bit of insight into the background of Captain Coke, and it was interesting. And then I think it was Pocket who asked Captain Coke for a little bit of explanation about what it was. And
Hmm.
so Pocket's character, Darius Elion, got inspiration, and Captain Coke got inspiration. And then we moved on, and that felt really nice. Like, that whole exchange and interaction, it felt like we explored more information, we learned some stuff, both characters just got inspiration, it was really easy for them to know. And then also, I noticed that both of them used it really aggressively, fairly quickly, like, over the course
Yeah.
of the next hour or so of play. But what I noticed, and then basically, the session continued and ended. But what I noticed, like, early warnings I'm keeping my eye on for next time, and I'm not going to change
Yeah.
it because we haven't had enough testing to see. But question number one is every long rest too infrequent?
Sure.
Should it maybe be possible during short rests also? And I think that's very reasonable to consider. So that's just like, if I want this to happen generally, like 3 to 4 times per episode, like, maybe players don't get that many long rests, and it's important to, like, allow it to happen during short rests too. And then secondly, what about those neat moments that happen outside of this sort of formula? Like, do we need
Right.
to bring them back in a rest moment? Do I want to have players start saying, okay, like, for example, Grigori says, okay, I guess I come back and the woman is no longer with me, and we can take a look at what happened during the next long rest. Like,
Yeah.
would that be interesting, or do I want to see it at the moment it occurs and then figure out some way to give inspiration for it? I don't know. Interesting
Right.
question.
So tying it to making it a parallel with the long rest thing might mean that you're potentially missing out, or having folks run into trouble because they're not role playing, or you think they might not be role playing as much as they would because they're waiting to reveal stuff so they can get rewarded for it. Like, did you get that impression?
No, I didn't get that impression at all.
Okay.
In this group, nobody seemed to be waiting to get rewarded.
Yeah, and see, that's the thing, because I think that the initial response that a lot of people have is like, well, you shouldn't reward role play because no one's gonna role play unless they can get the reward. Um, but the other thing is that, like, I think people are gonna role play anyway, and there isn't really anything you have to worry about there.
It actually seemed like all of them were role playing a lot in their characters, just as a matter of course. Like, it didn't feel like anybody was tuning back. And then someone in chat commented that JP actually commented at the end that it felt cool that there was a spot for bringing up these sort of background segments where like there was a time to explore that aspect of his character, because generally maybe it feels a little forced to be like, oh, I'm just going to sort of inject my background into this part and be like, oh, this reminds me of the time when I was a pirate or something like that.
Yeah.
Whereas to have this moment where, okay, you know, does anybody want to talk a little bit about, you know, have a scene? It was an interesting sort of solution.
Yeah, and I think that that very much is relevant and important. That idea that you can step in, there's a place for you to step in and be like, we're going to talk about my character now, right? That it's not about I'm going to awkwardly interject myself into the game. It's I have something to say about my character. I'm waiting for the time when that's appropriate. Now I'm going to say it, and we can get back to the like core stuff in the game. So I think that people forget about the fact that like having a space for that can be really helpful, and that it's not just about giving people experience for role playing. It's about giving them a time in the game in which they can focus on specific stuff.
Yeah.
Because I think that it can be very difficult when you're playing a role-playing game to be like, well, I have a thing to say and I want the spotlight, and the game isn't helping me, right? The game isn't giving me like a time to say like, hey, can I talk about my thing now, without me also feeling like it's not hindering the game. Because if I do that, if I stop the game to talk about my character, I am preventing everyone else in the party from getting experience.
Yep.
Right? Like I'm straight up making the game harder for us.
Yeah. That's a really good point. So that was all very interesting. I was overall really happy with the way it worked out. I'd love to see it play out in like another 4 or 5 sessions before I really start evaluating it. And, you know, I look forward to seeing it again in the near future.
So my thought on inspiration.
Incidentally, if you came over from Roleplay and JP is hosting us, which is awesome, thank you for that, JP, then welcome. We're talking about adjustments that might be helpful to make to 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons in order to specifically make it work better for the West Marches. There will be no spoilers for yesterday's West Marches show. If we get into spoilers, I will tell you, and then when the spoiler is over, I will give the OK sign. So, welcome. We love you guys.
Yes. Hey. Okay. So, this is the thing that I think we need to do. Is we went in to that West Marches episode sort of purely experimentally, right? To be like, hey, we have this new idea. Let's try it. Did you spend any time after the show or since talking to the players about like what did you think of it? What kind of feedback did you get from them?
I asked them about it, and they.
And was that a? I mean, I imagine that was a not a prompted thing, right? You just said like, "Hey, what did you think?"
Yeah.
Or did you have specific questions?
No, I just said, "Hey, what did you think about that?" And the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. They all thought it was pretty cool. We talked a little bit just like this about it back and forth, like, oh, maybe it could be in short rests too, who knows? But overall, everybody seemed really enthusiastic about it. I might put together some specific questions about it for next time.
Yeah, that'd be my thought, right? Is to say like, because if you want good information from your playtesters, just saying what did you think of this?
You're just gonna get a very general.
So my thought would be, okay, what about this made you think about your character more, or did this rule make you think about your character more? Do you think that you like or at least think about the other characters more than you did without this rule? How do you think the rule affected pacing in the game? Do you think that it slowed us down or gave us space to slow down? You know, right? And that phrasing I think is really important, right? Because some people feel like, okay, well, it's time to continue doing the adventure, and anything that slows the adventure down, forget it. Let's do our long rest, skip over anything that might be happening and move on. Or was it nice to be able to take a breath and be like, okay, so we're dealing with some crazy stuff, but we got a chance to do a long rest. Did it improve that sense of back and forth between those? Pacing, I think, is really important for this specific thing.
Okay. All of those seem like interesting questions, but I was making a secondary Google document for inspiration specifically. So let me get your thoughts on those again. I'm totally with you.
That's
feedback questions. How did you feel the pacing was affected?
Yeah,
Did it create space for this kind of interaction? Did it take away from the rest of the episode?
Yeah, right. And this is important. Like, do you think that? Because I think it's important for us to both. We could do a whole thing about playtesting feedback, and
Mm.
like it's. I mean, it's part of a larger discipline of like surveying and stuff, where you want to give people the information that they need to give you the answers that not necessarily you're looking for, but the answers that can help inform what you're doing. We want to inform them a little bit about what our intent is, but we also don't want to just be like, this is what we're trying to do. Did it do
Hmm.
that? Because people are going to be like, I don't know. Yes.
Yeah.
No, I don't know.
So what are some of the
Um,
good questions to ask about it
so
besides the pacing?
yeah, I think the two things are pacing, right? Like, did it improve or damage the pacing, and if so, in what way? And we can talk to them about how we feel like that happened. And then the other side of it is, how did it help you look at your character and look at the other characters, right? Like, do you give more of a shit about the other characters now? Like, when you learn these things, how does it affect your experience of play? And did it make you want to share your character? And if so, did it make you think about your character in a way that you might not have before? Because ultimately, like, if we look at authority in West Marches, it's very traditional. Like, you have authority over all of the GM stuff, where it's like, this is
Yeah.
the world,
Yeah.
and we can't play the West Marches and be like, oh, I know what's over that hill. It's
Hmm.
this castle, because I was there one time.
Yep.
Um, but players do have authority over their own character, and so we want to inspire them, pun not intended, I guess,
Yeah.
to share that stuff, right? Like,
Yeah.
inspiration is a reward for sharing your character.
We want them to feel like there is a space for them to share their character and mechanics to help them think about their character.
Yeah. So yeah, like I would stay the course with the way that it is now, and like this is one of these things where sometimes you just know a thing is broken right away. It doesn't feel like that right now. But I think also we don't have a lot of like the high watermark for metrics on inspiration is pretty fucking low. Like it's
Yeah.
very low because I mean like we talked to some other people who play the game. We talked to some developers from Wizards about the game, and the general impression that I get both from anecdotes and from the text itself is that while the opportunities in which you give a character inspiration are clear, they're obvious. They're not clear on the player side, right? The players can't trigger them really because ultimately it's several pages in the Dungeon Master's Guide, some paragraphs in the player's handbook, and it all boils down to whenever the GM feels like handing it out.
Yep. So, that's some stuff about inspiration. I look forward to playing with it more as time goes forwards.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to keep at it, and it may end up that it's a terrible pile of garbage rule, but it might not, right? Then we're going to tweak it and adjust it as we move on, and we'll come up with other ideas that we'll either be able to synthesize into these or run them in parallel, right? Think about like, okay, if it works this way, these are the things that are good about it. How can we fix those things? Do we need to scrap it? Again, a big part of all of this stuff is just killing your darlings, right? Come up with an idea.
Case in point, the inspiration rule I started last session with was completely different from what we actually ended up with, or significantly different. It's once you start actually digging into a rule and finding all the problems with it, you got to start throwing that stuff out, right? It's okay.
Well, and I think too the idea is that once an idea is alive, even deciding not to use it doesn't mean you can't chop it up into little pieces and sew it onto other ideas, because an idea is made up of several sub-concepts, and so you can take little bits and pieces of it that might work in another way.
Totally.
Yeah.
So, should we talk about experience?
Well, do you want to go over backgrounds first? I think we should save.
No, sorry.
Let's save experience till we have like a full hour to talk about it, because this is gonna be like a roll your sleeves up and get bloody kind of thing.
Yep. Backgrounds were the second one. So let's see. Get shareable link. I'll drop the new backgrounds link in chat so you guys can take a look at that. Good. So like the West Marches are like a fairy tale frontier. There are villages that dot the wilderness, each with their own legends and rumors. Magic as a controlled thing is rare, but it's known. Most people live very sheltered lives. They never venture outside of their hold. Some, a very rare few, leave behind the life of civilization and journey to Viriskali to try their luck as an adventurer. So like we talked a little bit last time, just to very quickly summarize, there are some backgrounds that I really don't like as backgrounds for the West Marches specifically, like the noble is a really easy one. It doesn't feel like nobles should be roaming the wilderness of the marches and getting murdered and then like having nobody come to claim their body or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And then, like, there are some other backgrounds that are appropriate for the West Marches, but where their special feature breaks the West Marches in ways that make it less interesting. Like the Outlander, who thematically is very appropriate, but has a feature that just eliminates some of the fun, quote-unquote, of playing the West Marches.
Yeah, and my thoughts on backgrounds as a mechanical and as a setting component, as a narrative drive for the game, is that yes, they bolster character creation. They give you essentially subclasses. They create an implied setting that's true for every game of D&D if you use them as they're written, and they provide you with a purely narrative-focused ability that doesn't require any dice rolls to modify the way the game is going. Mm-hmm. Now, one thing I wanted to talk about with backgrounds, I feel like we might want to look at places where is there anything you want to add to what a background does, like? Or take things out of it?
There's actually some stuff that I started thinking about as we went through this. Like, for example, we have sort of an acolyte who's like a low-level assistant in a parish church, right? In the rule as written, the acolyte can choose 2 languages. Yeah. And then the way that I interpreted it, I said, in the West Marches, if you're like a parish churchman, you're probably not learning Abyssal or whatever, but you probably are learning Dwarfish, Elvish, or Gnomish.
Depends on the church.
Yeah. You probably are learning Dwarfish, Elvish, or Gnomish because you're serving communities, and then also, like, you might learn whatever the religious language is. So if your holy texts are written in Celestial, you might know that, or if they're written in Draconic, you might know that. So instead of choose 2 languages, I wrote down here, choose 2 from Dwarvish, Elvish, Gnomish, Celestial, Draconic. Sort of establishing, okay, these are the languages that a person from this background would know. So just starting to like break it down and think about why would an acolyte know these things and what would that mean?
Right.
And then I haven't yet hacked into it, but the equipment, I started looking at the value that you get out of the equipment from each background. And there's some fairly large discrepancies. Generally, an acolyte starts with approximately 26 gold pieces worth of stuff, and a criminal starts with 16. A sage starts with 21. So, just differences.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that they're balanced economically by any means. Now we talked a little bit about what is the background, and I just had this thought. So is the background in the game meant to be for West Marches purely a past thing, like you were an acolyte and now you're an adventurer, or is it this is the thing you fall back on when you're not adventuring? Because I think that there's a space there that overlaps with some of the town investment stuff where it's like, okay, so if and this is where features might come into play in a little bit more West Marchy way, where it's like if you're absent for every week of play you miss, every session you're not a part of, you can get, one thing, like choose from this list, or you get one kind of bonus for the next episode. Because we know what did Grigori do for like the time, all this other adventures going on. We want the characters, I think, not to be static in the way that like a video game NPC is, where it's like, oh, I just stood here for 16 weeks.
Yep,
yeah. So it's, I think that the easy route would be you used to be an acolyte, now you're not, you're an adventurer, but we could also look at mechanically tying in, you used to be an acolyte, you're an adventurer, but when you're not adventuring, there's a space for you in Virascali to do these things.
Yeah. Like, I think I find it a very interesting idea. I think I don't. One of the things that I like sort of conceptually about like the waiting in town versus the going out and adventuring is that sort of philosophically I think that adventurers shouldn't be they shouldn't have a lot of success back in their civilized life.
Right,
so,
because that's why they're adventurers.
Yeah, so like I enjoy actually draining away some of your hard-earned cash during those periods where you're just resting in town because like you're not that great at managing your money or at earning it or whatever.
So maybe all these backgrounds then should just be explicitly called former acolyte or former criminal or whatever.
But that's to continue on that point. That's not to say I don't think they should have or. That's not to say I think they shouldn't have some modern function. I think it could
Well,
be
so
interesting to do something with that.
so let's take that idea. Let's put a pin in it, and when we get to the downtime thing,
Mm-hmm.
YouTube, Twitch chat, everybody remember that we were talking about this. Help us remember later when we get to that. Backgrounds should be tied to that in some way, potentially. So just take
Yeah.
that. When we get to downtime, we'll come back and think about it. Because I do think that that's an important thing, right? Because it's like you spend your previous life doing a thing, and maybe when you are not out in the world risking your life for stuff, maybe that's how you fall back a little bit. And we can
Yeah.
talk about how that
Like
fits.
I think that like maybe being an acolyte, you don't literally go acolyte and earn money doing that during downtime, but as a result you have access to certain things during downtime that people who are not acolytes don't, or something like that. I think there's a very interesting idea there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you know, just a little bit of creative direction here at the top of the document. Backgrounds should generally feel historically medieval in nature. And you dropped a comment on that, Adam, asking actual medieval or Warhammer medieval?
Because they're very different.
Yeah, so why don't you tell me more about why you asked that?
Well, because I think again, it's about flavor, right? Like it's about establishing the. I think honestly, like because you're the GM, you're interfacing with the rules, and I'm a player, and I just care about like. When I'm thinking about making a character, I'm thinking about what the character's space is in the world. So I'm thinking about what the implied setting of these is. So like actual medieval is pretty. I think a lot of people assume that the Dark Ages or the Dark Ages, the like late classical period, was all like mud-soaked shithead peasants who were all diseased and everything was terrible. And like your choices were to be like a burgomaster or like a night soil farmer. Like but in actual medieval history, there's like a really broad set of, in a lot of ways, fairly modern professions. Like the middle class was starting to exist in the late medieval.
Mm-hmm.
So if we go with the Warhammer medieval, it's like medieval, but it also blends like some 16th century stuff, and it's part of their history, but it does still focus on that like you're a pile of shit mostly. Like you're either a noble or you're garbage, and there's a bunch of different flavors of garbage you can be, but like you're a rat catcher or like a plague doctor or a bone picker.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I guess for me, it wasn't about answering this specific question. It was about thinking about the implied setting and what kind of world that you want to portray outside of the West Marches, because ideally every peasant that we run into, every noble or mayor or shopkeeper or whatever, should still be one of these things.
Mm-hmm.
Like
these are your level 0 class.
Yeah, these are the thing you were before, and like we should go into a shop and be like, God damn, if only I had made a different choice in life, this could be my shop. I could be doing this instead of going out there and getting leprosy all the time.
Yeah, I think that's the right sort of impression to be getting from civilization.
Yeah.
It's like acolytes who are successful become clerks and scribes and illuminators and priests.
So for me, the thing that I think is super interesting about this is, as a player, the tension, right? The tension between NPCs and PCs. And this is going to be me getting off on a bit of like a weird GM thing, but like I love the idea that PCs view themselves as like desperate, murderous, like we got to do what we got to do. And sometimes that's killing people. Sometimes we enjoy it. Sometimes we don't. It's like, it's a thing that we have to do. And we don't necessarily, all of us, choose to be adventurers, right? We could have been something else. This is just the dark path that we ended up on. And we look at NPCs with both a degree of disdain, where we're like, yeah, but I have a sword and levels and I can cast spells. What have you got? And then they are like, well, I've got a house and a wife and a son. Like, I live an actual safe life in Virascali. But at the same time, the tension for them is that they look at us like, you're a bunch of insane murder hobos, but you have a shit ton of gold, and maybe there's some glory there, and I'm a little jealous that I couldn't go out and adventure. Like, why do I have to toil for my lord on the farm every day when you get to go out and be adventurous? So there's this like economical and social pressure between both of those groups that I think is super interesting in medieval role-playing games. And I can feel it a little bit in the West Marches, in our interactions with some of the more like normal NPCs, right?
Yeah, definitely. I really like that note, and I've written it down. I actually like Wouldn't it be interesting if there was a game where NPCs explicitly had classes and like PCs explicitly started with one level in those NPC classes and then went,
I mean, there's lots of subsystems that we could spiral out from that,
yeah,
where downtime awards you points to spend on your like NPC class. Where like, okay, cool, Grigori spent, and you choose, right. I'm gonna put some levels into my beggar skill box because I got leprosy. So what did I do? I hung out in the street outside the temple begging for coins. So maybe I get to start the next episode with like 5 gold or whatever.
yeah,
So here's the thing again. Pin in it, put it up on the imaginary cork board.
yep.
So with backgrounds as they stand, the thing that I noticed that you added that I thought was really interesting was the consider the following questions
Yeah.
part. I wanted to get you to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So like I'll start going through the Acolyte, and I'll just drop this link in chat again in case anybody's missing it.
Sure.
Wow. I'll start talking through the Acolyte, which comes from the player's handbook. And I don't think the name is quite right. Acolyte to me doesn't seem to evoke the kind of imagery that I see in my head when I see these people. And interestingly, like I actually do think that the West Marches backgrounds should be a little more historical medieval, a little more like the kinds of people you meet in fairy tales where it's like, yeah, this is the carrot seller, and this is the, horse shoer, and this is the, all of these very specific types of medieval professions, but not, the rat catcher and the bone picker and the plague doctor and whatever. So
Sure.
to contrast the Acolyte in the player's handbook with the Acolyte as I've written it, in the player's handbook, the Acolyte spent his or her life in the service of a temple to a god or specific pantheon of gods. You act as an intermediary between the realm of the holy and the mortal world, performing sacred rites and offering sacrifices in order to conduct worshippers into the presence of the divine. You choose a god, a pantheon of gods to worship. Were you a lesser functionary in a temple, raised from childhood to assist the priests in the sacred rites? Or were you a high priest who suddenly experienced a call to serve your god in a different way? Perhaps you were the leader of a small cult outside of any established temple structure, or even an occult group that served a fiendish master who you now deny. So,
Yeah, or who some other adventurers killed.
yeah. So,
that demon you loved, yeah, he got killed by some paladin, and now you're out on your ass.
It's the endless cycle of adventure.
Yeah. You're somebody else's supervillain.
Yep. So, as I've written it now, the description has become: you served some parish church as a low-level assistant. You attended the simpler needs of the congregation and performed clerical work for the parish priest. Perhaps you were studying for a higher calling, or perhaps it was the only option available to you. And it's kind of pared down, but it's also very explicit. Like, you weren't the leader of an occult, sect or anything like that. You weren't a high priest. Because if you were those things, like, those things are the level 10 acolyte, the level 15 acolyte. You were a level 0 acolyte, and now you're a level 1 fighter.
Yeah, there's an alternate universe in which you got to go down that path. This is not that universe.
Yep, exactly. And then, so like, it's a little briefer, and I kind of feel like maybe expanding on like looking at historical roles in the church and being like, were you a this, that, the other, A, B, C, D, E. Think about it, but you don't necessarily need to decide. And then because of the work on inspiration, I added this point here. Consider the following questions. You don't necessarily need to answer them now. Maybe you will discover more as you adventure. 1. How did your parish priest behave? How did you feel about him or her? 2. What were your primary duties and how did you feel about them? 3. What caused you to leave this life behind? And actually on every background I've put so far, the third question is always, what caused you to leave this life behind? Just because to make it explicit.
Sure. Well, and again, I think that the questions that you ask the players, if they're going to be an explicit thing that you write down, I think that they say things about the world too, right? Because they're leading questions.
Yeah.
So they're important to have. Now, it sounds to me like the backgrounds are leaning more towards former profession and less towards, like, because some of the backgrounds, and these are the backgrounds that I hate, they're like things like born leader or folk hero.
Folk hero.
Like, folk hero is a thing that maybe happened to you, but it shouldn't, like, you wouldn't get paid for that, right? If you were just like, I'm a folk hero, people would be like, awesome, thanks for saving the town, we're going to go back to the farm, and then you become a beggar, right? Because, So I don't know, maybe renaming it profession or
Yep,
something
yep.
is
Profession.
helpful.
Now that's
Um,
also raises a curious
former
point.
profession, I guess.
It raises a curious point. Here, I'll just make another comment here. Comment. Add a comment. Should these be former professions?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. The other brainstormy thing that I wrote down here is, should the character's age matter more? Because I like the urchin background, but it doesn't make sense for a 90-year-old to choose the
I was an urchin
background.
until I was
Yeah,
65.
exactly. So like,
I got a gold watch for retiring from the Urchin Corporation.
maybe they are backgrounds, but there's actually different categories depending on age, and this actually opens an entirely different interesting can of worms, I think, which is that in traditional D&D right now in 5th ed, your age matters nothing. It's a purely cosmetic sort of thing. But
Yeah.
because the West Marches
So,
tracks time so rigorously, it has the
so
possibility of
this,
having age
yeah,
matter.
and plus, like, ghosts and witches and whites and stuff that age you 10 or 15 years, right now,
Mm-hmm.
who gives a shit, right? Where you're
Yeah.
like, I'm Grigori, I'm fighting, and I'm white, and oh, he touched me and I aged 10 years, cool, now I'm 70. So, like, what's the difference? I don't know, maybe my beard has some gray in it.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't.
So
I think that the thing is, like, the reason why we're asking all these questions is because background and downtime are intricately linked through chronology, right? Chronology is the thing that makes these systems matter because it's what did you do before and what do you do when we don't see you, and those are time passing in a way that they don't pass on screen. So I think that that stuff is relevant in terms of it's all tied together, right?
yeah,
It's all
definitely.
collective.
So I had a thought where, like, maybe like teens and young children can choose from this set of backgrounds, and then adults choose from that set of backgrounds, and those probably look a lot more like professions. And then
I,
elderly people choose from this other sort of backgrounds, and maybe that's where you start seeing stuff like the sage and the arcane researcher, and things that
I
take a
feel
long
like
time to master.
I feel like I'm like breaking contract if I don't use these two words every time we talk about this. Burning wheel.
Yep.
I don't
I
even,
was gonna say it for you.
I'm not even gonna give it context. I'm just gonna say burning
Burning
wheel. I'm
wheel.
gonna
Yep.
just put that on the table and we'll just leave it there
Good.
while we talk about this other
You
stuff.
need to run a game for me sometime, Adam.
Seriously,
So I know what I'm missing out on.
I know. If you
So
weren't so busy being a game designer.
yeah, God. So yeah, just continuing on with the acolyte skill proficiencies. I was happy with the insight and religion skill proficiencies. I could see two other where it's like, instead of just being a one thing where it's like I choose the acolyte background, everybody with the acolyte background has the same thing. I could see it being like, choose either A, insight and religion, or B, religion and deception. And then like those two choices give you a very different feel for like what your acolyte was like in his past, experience. Like, oh, I was the kind of acolyte who really read people, who like really attended to people's needs.
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
versus, oh, I was the acolyte who like focused on fooling people into thinking things were better or whatever.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
sort of there's a possibility to keep these feeling very bundled, but also give players a little bit more choice. Not
Well, yeah,
certain
and
if it's what we want to do or not, but
I think yeah, and I think that background is an interesting thing because it's very tricky to balance it all from the perspective of we're all first level characters because it's like, cool, I'm a first level cleric. My character is like 65 years old. What did I do the whole rest of my life? I don't know, but apparently it wasn't gain experience because
yep,
I'm still level
yeah,
one. And then you look at an elf and you're like, what the fuck have you been doing with your
yeah.
life, son?
600
You are,
years old,
yeah,
level one
you are
wizard.
290 and you
Yeah,
only know magic missile?
yeah,
Get back to wizard school, you
yep.
lazy elf.
Elves live way
So
longer, but they live way slower.
live way slower. So I don't know. That's a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So cool. All right. I mean, I think that mechanically, like we're thinking about a lot of interesting stuff, but mechanically, there's not too much to change about this because it's really an offshoot of character creation. And
Yep.
unless we fuck with character creation really dramatically, we're either going to keep it as an offshoot and just modify the proficiencies that you get and the languages and the feature, like just the stuff that it adds to your character, or we're going to have to chop it off and make it its own subsystem that's tied more into the time passing thing. So I think that the first step right now, and the way we're doing it right now, is it makes sense to say, okay, let's just look at it as it stands as a mechanic in D&D,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll go from there. Like
Yeah.
that's a place to start.
I'm actually starting to think it becomes much more interesting if it is tied into the A, the passage of time, and
Yeah.
B, the downtime between adventures. But as it is right now, we can talk a lot about like these sorts of things. So the next thing that backgrounds give you is they give you two proficiencies, either two tool proficiencies, two language proficiencies, or one of each. So here for the acolyte, he or she was originally able to choose two from any of the languages, and there was no distinction made from common languages and exotic languages. And then because of my sort of vision of the West Marches, I chose the three common languages, Dwarvish, Elvish, and Gnomish, and then I added on the two languages that I see as being more religious, so Celestial and Draconic.
So I'm gonna throw a wrench into your plans here.
Yeah.
Do you think that it fits the exploration model that all humans speak the same language and all dwarves and all elves speak the same language? Because I feel like in a game based on exploration, it's probable that there's a lot more human languages than just we all speak the common trade tongue. Because where the hell would you learn that if you're not a merchant?
Yeah, so I feel pretty similar about this, where like it is strange that everybody speaks the same thing, and like on the scale the West Marches is currently operating, where players are moving maximum 4 days away from Virascali, it's likely that any humans within that area are going to be speaking the same language. But if they took a ship across even like a small sea where they journeyed for a week and they got to a foreign shore, probably nobody there would speak the same language. There'd be a trade tongue, but nothing else.
Well, and that's just D&D is tending towards monoculture, right? Where they're like, you're an elf, you're like every other fucking elf. All elves are the same.
Yeah.
Except if you're a dark elf, then you're like a bad version.
So, how much I really want to drag languages into that, I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a question worth asking. I'm
Sure.
gonna put a comment.
I guess just as a player, it would be a weird hit to encounter a human who doesn't speak common. I'd feel a little like, well, where was my option to like learn this language? How did they get a weird language? Like I feel like Grigori probably speaks common and some other human dialect. But like it's less about character creation stuff, and if you just want to be like, cool, all humans speak the same language, all dwarves speak the same language, that's fine, because it does get more complicated, but it's like, does it make sense, right? Does it fit? Not that it's realistic, but does it fit the people, your creative vision for the West Marches? So anyway, language, just a tiny little thing, not super relevant right now.
Yep, totally.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that something like that would have to tie into, like, deeply into the hex crawl mechanics of the West Marches, and how far players can get and how quickly, and what medium and high level play looks like in contrast to low level play.
Yeah, I mean, how big is the West Marches, right? Are we talking about like Wisconsin, or are we talking about Russia, right?
Yeah. Like right now, it's not even Wisconsin, right? It's
I've seen hex crawls. I've seen hex crawls do both. Like the last time that I ran one, we ended up measuring the full length and breadth of the space that they explored, and it was tiny. It was like Oregon or something sized. So yeah, I mean, you don't go more than 100 miles in any direction. And you might run into 2 or 3 dialects. But I think it's just a thing at character creation where if I never have the option, then it can be confusing in play when I run into an obstacle that I've never been given the opportunity to have a tool to fix.
There's another interesting question there where since the West Marches ostensibly allows a lot of newer players to join the group, if you see, Kalish and, Baelish on your options for languages to learn, like, Dwarvish, Elvish, Gnomish, Kalish, and Baelish, like, do you even have any idea what that means? Like, are you likely to pick them, or are you just likely to say, well, I don't know what that means, and then, that GM has to say, oh, in this setting, 5 days to the west, there's another kingdom, and, blah, 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 or 15 days to the west, or something like that. Hard to say. Worth considering.
Yeah, and I think that it's, I mean, again, it's just like the mechanics, and you're going to hear me say this all the time if you're watching this or any other show where I ever talk about role-playing games, the systems of the game are part of the setting, and the setting is reflected in the systems. So that's a thing. It's a real thing.
Yeah.
So the equipment, you talked a little bit about balancing that out. Those changes I think are about what you want the players to have and what makes sense in availability in Virascali, and like,
now
that's all I think,
There's
fairly straightforward to modify.
there's another interesting comment here, and actually, this to me it also opens another can of worms, which is the economy. So, the equipment for an acolyte is a holy symbol worth 5 gold pieces, a prayer book, which is not a thing you can purchase in the equipment section of the player's handbook, or a prayer wheel, same.
It's also they're both things I don't think you really need.
Yeah, that's flavor.
Like your characters doesn't need them to cast spells or memorize them or
Yep.
whatever. You're an acolyte. You're not even a cleric, so it doesn't
Yeah.
matter.
Yeah.
Okay.
5 sticks of incense, same. There's no rules or anything for these. 1 set of vestments, which I judged was a costume and priced it at 5 gold pieces. 1 set of common clothes, 5 silver pieces. 1 belt pouch, 5 silver, and 15 gold pieces. Total value, 26 gold pieces. I found it interesting that like a prayer book is not a thing that exists anywhere. It's a purely like this thing practically doesn't need to exist in my
Yeah.
inventory, other than it's a flavorful item that I have that is priestly. So, like, I would sort of start looking at what the costs are for things, and like, what's the cost for a day's living in a medieval society? Like, what as a farmer can you expect to quote unquote earn for a day?
Well,
And
I mean,
what are your
this stuff
expenses? And
this stuff gets all fucked up when you introduce adventurers, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I've never, in my mind, ever seen a role-playing game whose economy section accounts for the fact that, all right, I'm Joe Adventurer, and I've got my jerk adventurer friends with me. We go into a dungeon, we kill some monsters. Maybe we don't all come back out alive, but when I come back alive, I have 6,000 GP diamonds on me.
mm-hmm.
I am the god king of the economy now, right?
Yep.
Like I could buy the entire nearest town, no problem.
Yep.
And it completely unseats things, and it all falls on the GM to manage that, where you're in this position where you either build the adventures and their rewards in such a way that they don't unseat the economy, or you prepare yourself for your whole game to get managed by that economy.
Yeah.
So it's I don't know, subsystems, right?
Yep. So like there's something in there, and like I have at certain points in time sort of started looking through and being like, okay, if this is how much, a bushel of grain costs, then that lasts you this many days. And yeah, it's that's the kind of stuff I get really into in my own head. And if we get far enough in this hack, I will probably spend lots of time looking into that. And also like sinks and faucets. I love economies in video games, and like MMOs are a big thing for me. So like where you get gold from and what you spend gold on, and how to create an economy that keeps people feeling like they can't quite always get all the things that they want, but they're always close.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
I love it.
And this is the thing, like you don't want to be in a position as a GM when your job, especially in a game like this, is creating a world in which the setting feels realistic. You don't want to be put in a position to be making decisions about the economy based on trying to exert a specific effect, right? You don't want to be like, well, it makes sense that this dragon would have like 7,000 gold, but hold on, I don't want them to get 7,000 gold.
Yep.
That's going to fuck up the economy. So let's make the dragon not have that much money, because then you're betraying the game, right?
Oh,
You're
yeah.
betraying your creative vision for the game.
I think it needs to be a thing where, like, once players reach the point where they're able to take on challenges that are rewarding them 7,000 gold, they've all of a sudden discovered something that they need 7,000 or like 7,500 gold in order to get, or something like that.
And that can feel dangerously artificial too if you keep being like, it's like the whole like you got 7,000 gold, but now the next thing costs 7,001 gold. Now you have to go back.
I mean, like it's like to a certain extent the shops that I've put into Virascali operate that way a little bit, where it's like, okay, adventurers are starting to come back with like 200, 300 gold between them. Hey, if you'd like to make your future adventuring easier, you can spend 100 of that and get a potion seller in town. And then there'll be opportunities to level that person up through the investment of future, funds and stuff like that.
And one thing I think that would help, and like again from like a creative vision perspective, what does the source material say about people who get rich, right? What do the fairy tales say about the guy who got the treasure from the giant, right? He goes back to town, he marries the princess, and what? So he buys himself a princehood, and now he's a prince.
Yep.
Guess who's not an adventurer anymore,
Yep.
right?
They live happily ever after. They don't keep
Like
adventuring.
I mean, I would love to just buy a Vera Scully, right? To be like, oh, guess who owns this town? We do.
Yep.
Adventurers are in charge now,
Yeah.
right? But again, as soon as you and we talked about this with the castle thing, like why didn't we move into the castle, right? Like
Hmm.
that jerk off knight, we fought him and killed him and took his castle, but why didn't we move in? And there's this whole like fictional thing that I don't think we ever got to address because for some reason we forgot about it. But there's like a push to stay in town because the wilds are weird and they make you weird, right?
Now, like there's this idea in the back of my mind that is potentially mechanizable, but
Yeah.
not necessarily. So it almost comes a little bit from Torchbearer's sort of like humanity stat, where if you get too high or too low, you either like go insane or you know drift back to town or whatever.
Yeah.
That sort of thing to me, to my mind, fits very naturally within the West Marches. So it's like if you're living within the protections of civilization and you stay within the bounds of civilization, then you are on, you know, we could even call it law and chaos, right? You're on the law side of the scale. And
Yeah.
that's where you belong, that's where you fit, that's what works for you. And if you drift too far to the law side, you settle down, you find yourself a wife or a husband, you
Sure.
open up shop. Whereas
Yeah,
on the other
that's
side, if you're living out in the wilderness for too long, your points start rapidly progressing into the chaos side. You stop being a player character, you start being a threat.
So this mechanic, and I think there's some when we start looking at high level play or like you've been an adventurer for a long time, I think this is definitely a thing, a measure to look at. It comes from the Burning family of games. I'll use Mouse Guard as an example because it's pretty straightforward. So in Mouse Guard, you have mouse nature, and the higher it is, the more like a mouse you are. But the fact is, you're a member of the Mouse Guard, and you have to protect mouse civilization with your sword and your axe, and like go out there and do human things. So the lower your mouse nature, the more like a human you are. The faster you can learn things, the braver you are, or whatever. But if you get all the way to away from mouse nature, you lose all your nature. Then you stop giving a shit about mouse society, right? You're like, I'm too like humanistic
human.
for this. Yeah. But if you get all the way up on mouse nature to 10, you're like, why am I wearing clothes? Why am I speaking? Why am I like standing on my hind legs? You throw aside your equipment and you just go off into the wild and forget that you have thoughts, right? So it's a thing that I think is cool if you want to diametrically oppose the world and civilization, and adventurers are a thing that fluctuates inside of that,
Yeah.
which I think is cool, and I would include it. And it's definitely something that we can think about outside of this. But I think for like just strictly for backgrounds, modification is our first step. Modification and playtesting, both of a new list of a new list of professions or whatever we want to call them, and then modifications on existing that we can use, and then just playtest them, right? And that's going to take time because you have to have new characters.
Yeah. So, I'd like to like quickly talk about the new feature, and then we can take our break, and then we can talk
Yeah, no,
about
that sounds good.
XP.
Yeah.
So the previous feature is Shelter of the Faithful, which is that you get free healing and care at a temple, shrine, or other established presence of your faith, and you probably have ties to a specific temple, and you get aid from that temple basically at whatever you want. And I don't like that because it's just a narrative thing that requires no rolling of dice. Like it's just you just get things right for free.
Yeah.
So I formed a new feature kind of modeling on the sort of Apocalypse World, Dungeon World style of when you do X, roll, and then you maybe have some results depending on what you rolled. So the rule as I wrote it is when you approach the devoutly religious asking for aid, roll your religion. On a success, you've made all the right obeisances. They are endeared to you and inclined to help, so long as it doesn't disrupt their usual duties. They may offer
Yeah.
you a one-time discount of up to 25% or agree to help in some other non-financial way. On a fail, you've mixed up some important details. They see your obvious attempt, but they'll need some concrete assurance of an equivalent exchange before helping you. So it's kind of like,
So you're taking a thing that I mean you're to use the common parlance, you're nerfing the features.
Yeah, I mean, I guess.
I'm gonna put so my thought looking at it is it's not bad, right? If everyone is using the same rules, then those are the rules. But I feel like this implies that, then this is the trick. You see this in Apocalypse World and Dungeon World too. If you give somebody a move, it implies no one else can
Yep.
do that.
Yeah, exactly.
They're at the mercy of the GM. So if I approach the devoutly religious and I'm not an acolyte, I don't get to roll my religion.
Well, I think it would be like you probably can, but that's a much longer role played scene, and then also like you're not gonna get the same things. Like maybe...
the trick here too is applying. So I think we're gonna break D&D if we try this too hard, because D&D is binary in its success rate, where it's like whoever you are doesn't matter. You have the skill or don't have the skill. You can make a check. You will either succeed at the check or fail depending on the DC put in front of you. So adding in a nuance to that role is going to skew the game in a very strange way. I'm not saying we can't do it. I'm just saying we should be ready for this to break Dungeons and Dragons.
Well, I mean, it also implies that like other people can't go and convince the devoutly religious to give extra special aid.
I mean, this does say, if you keep it this way, it says something about the religions in the world, that they're like, you're either one of us or fuck you forever.
Yep.
Right? Like, it's either, if no one else is allowed to ask religious people for aid and you need help from a temple, you better convert or, I don't know, rob them of whatever they need, or like, you just can't do it. Like, that's it.
So that's all interesting, and we'll have to continue playing with that. I like your comments on that. I actually like the way it presents religions as kind of selfish and only interested in protecting their own. But yeah, like maybe it implies too much, or it takes too much away from other people.
Well, I mean, the trick here for this one specifically, and this is just a criticism about this one, this implies that if I'm a former criminal and a cleric now, I can't ask my own religion for help, even though I'm an active member of that religion.
But you could still steal from people.
Yeah, see, I guess it's just weird. Classes are weird. We'll talk about that later. Let's take a break. My brain is fried.
All right, y'all, we're going to take a 5-minute break. We'll come back with more Hack Attack soon.